technical glitch, but I think the glitch is fixed. And I'll check my... Somebody, I'm sure, will say something. My phone will start going off here in a second, maybe. But hopefully it's cleared, and at least they can hear me now at home. And if not, if I knew sign language to say apologies and catch you next time, I would. But anyway, we'll go ahead and get started tonight. We're talking about Corinthians, and we're in. We're going to finish chapter 8 real quick by doing the questions. We didn't get a chance last week to do the questions on chapter 8. And so we'll do the questions real quick on chapter 8 as a way of review. Then we'll dive into chapter 9 in our study together this evening. And so let's look at these real quickly. So what had the Macedonians done while confronting a great trial? Right, so they gave generously, even though it was challenging for them and difficult. Paul uses them as an example of how to give even when they're challenged. What had they done according to verse 5 specifically? Yeah, they gave of themselves. They gave themselves first. Because they gave themselves first, everything else followed as well. What did Paul encourage the Corinthians to do in verse 7? Say it one more time, I'm sorry. Yeah, okay. And to appreciate that grace, let me just show it on the screen real quick. As you abound in everything, in faith, in utterance, in knowledge, in all diligence, and in your love to us, see that you abound in this grace also. So you've done all these other things, and so make sure you abound in this grace, that specific act of liberality towards those who are in need. That's the discussion in hand here, to be involved in that as well. Christ became poor so that we might become what? Rich in what way? Yeah, in our faith, spiritually we might say, as it relates to that. In order to accomplish anything, there must first be what? All right, a willing mind. You got to think right before you can do right. I think that's a biblical principle, and I think it's a basic principle of life in some ways as well. Throughout this text, Paul is encouraging those in Corinth to take on what responsibilities as others had? Okay, the care for others and the concern that they could have for other people. What should be provided before God and all men? Yeah, honest things, right? Provide things that are honest before everybody. And do those things that are honorable as it relates to that. And what were they to prove? Okay, don't just say it, but live out that love before others. And so So Macedonia kind of became the poster, if you will, of what Paul was looking for, and then we can appreciate that Corinth is to kind of follow suit by that example. Even though Macedonia did it from their poverty, if you will, they get to do it from the generosity and strength that they had to be able to offer. Questions, thoughts about chapter 8? Just didn't have enough time. I don't recall at least doing those questions with you last Wednesday. So let's jump to chapter 9. Same topic, by the way, just a different kind of discussion as it relates to it. And the ministering to the saints. So Paul says, "For as touching the ministering to the saints, it is superfluous for me to write to you." What does he mean by that? Okay, maybe not necessary, we might say, or what's superfluous? Right, what's that word mean? Okay, so he's aware that way, but what is that? What's that word superfluous mean? Okay, right. It's excessive. It's over the top, right? Paul says, I know it's excessive. Don't raise your hand, don't nod, don't respond to this question. Just answer it in your head. Have you ever sat during a sermon or a Bible class and in your mind you're going, we get it, we get it, we get it, right? We've all been there, okay? Not you all so much because you're blessed, but You understand what I'm talking about. We've all sat there and go, okay, move on, Brian, we get it. Just like right now. Move on, we get it. That's kind of what Paul's doing here. He says, I know it's going to sound excessive. He just finished a lengthy paragraph, if you will, with them on the topic. And now he's doing what? Hey, come right back to it. I'm not done yet. This is going to sound excessive. I just told you about Macedonia. I tried to put them up as the example for you to follow. I've challenged you to learn from them and to do those things necessary. I know this is going to sound superfluous. It's going to sound excessive and beyond what's really necessary. But I'm going to do it anyway, Paul says. I want to talk about it just a little bit more to make sure that we understand. For I know, he said, it's excessive to write to you about this because I know the forwardness of your mind, for which I boast of you to them of Macedonia, that Achaia was ready a year ago, and your zeal hath provoked very many. So, Paul spoke of Macedonia. He speaks of Achaia. And it's obvious that folks kind of knew what Corinth was doing as well. Their actions as it relates to this purpose of a weekly collection, as we learned out of 1 Corinthians chapter 16, a laying by in store as they'd been prospered upon the first day of the week, as the churches of Galatia had done and other places that Paul had taught. It's apparent that they've become an example as well of preparing what was necessary to send to those needy saints. Where was it going to end up, by the way? Over in Judea, right? You can go into the book of Acts and you can kind of see the fruition of that. But Paul says, I know it's going to sound excessive, unnecessary. Why are we going down this road? But I boasted about you all. And because I've boasted about you all, I want to make sure we get this done right. I've told others about you. Your example and your zeal have provoked others. You know, we've all seen circumstances where the hype is greater than the reality, right? Where something was built to be this, and it turned out to be something far less than that. Well, what Paul was saying is, listen, I've been talking to everybody I can about how good you all have been about this purpose and the generosity you all have and your focus on this need and your desire to be helpful. I've been boasting. Don't let the hype be better than the reality. That's kind of what he's saying. Don't let all of this conversation and talk. I talked to you about Macedonia, for you an example. I've told other churches about you so that they could have an example. And if I've done all that and talked about your zeal and your efforts and how it's now stimulated and provoked them to get involved as well, let's make sure the realities fit all of this. Absolutely. And it's kind of hard for us to kind of envision the Apostle Paul saying that, but that's exactly what he's saying. How embarrassing it would be for them and him. Them because they have the ability and should be doing it. Him because he's been talking to everybody about them. And that's certainly true, Larry. There's more clarity that can be had if they'll give him the opportunity here to speak just a little bit more about the topic. So, I boasted about you to them of Macedonia, that Achaia was ready a year ago, and your zeal hath provoked very many. Yet have I sent the brethren. Who's that, by the way? Not trying to... Okay, so that's Titus. In this particular, that's Titus, and then those that were with him. Lest our boasting of you should be in vain in this behalf, that as I said, you may be ready. And so it appears that the reasoning that Paul sends Titus ahead is multi, right? There's multiple reasons why he sent him. We know he sent Titus ahead because he didn't want to get there without knowing how they received what? The first letter, right? We've talked about that. Paul didn't want to get there on his return trip unless Titus can get there first and report back as to how they received the first letter. Also, Titus has been sent so that he can kind of stimulate. Yeah, so that's right. So that all of this conversation isn't just conversation. The key word there in that is simply that he's hoping that they will be ready. You need to be ready. Friends, I don't know that there be no gatherings when I come. Think about that phrase for a minute. Paul says we're going to lay by and store upon the first day of the week so that there be no gatherings when I come. It's a lot easier to lay that in store over a period of time than to go into a mad scramble. Paul arrives on the scene, and now all of a sudden we're not ready. We don't have anything set aside. We want to help Judea, but now we got to collect it all in one moment, and how much more challenging that will be, and how less their ability to aid would be if they did it that way. So there's divine wisdom in lay by and store upon the first day of the week, not just for them, but for us as well. There's divine wisdom that benefits us as well, so that we're not, when moments of need arise, whatever they may be, that are authorized within Scripture, that we can handle those, and we're ready and prepared to handle them when they arrive, rather than having to try to figure them out in the moment. Go ahead, Ken. Let's not just talk about being willing and ready. Let's be ready. Let's be ready. That's kind of the point. And so he sent Titus and the brethren that were with him ahead for one of the specific reasons is this, and here's his defining reason, verse 4. Lest haply, if they of Macedonia come with me, and find you unprepared, we say not ye, should be ashamed in this same confident boasting. So that gets back to what Larry said a minute ago. Paul says, so if the folks of Macedonia come and they find you rather than ready, they find you, he said, unprepared. If they after all the bragging about you, and there happens to be some folks from Macedonia with Titus when he arrives there, they're going to wonder, well, wait a minute. Paul spoke to us about Corinth, and we went above what we were really, in most senses, that we're able to do. We gave beyond because we gave first of ourselves as our provoking example, and then all of a sudden they get there and see they're not even ready. They're not even prepared for that. Go ahead, I'm sorry. No, you're good, Gary, you're good. Sure. Being ready for all the work and purposes of God is an important, and being unprepared is difficult. I do not recall the preacher, but I do remember this being told as true. That there was a preacher on one occasion who traveled to conduct a gospel meeting, and he arrived at the building, and there was nobody there. And he began to inquire around and found some of the members, and their answer was, "We forgot. We forgot we invited you to come and hold this meeting. We just forgot." And there wasn't anybody there. So they said, well, he said, is there a place for me to stay? And as I recall, and again, sometimes fuzzy memories, but he went and stayed somewhere, and the next night they all came, and guess what? He's sitting at the hotel. They come and inquire of him, and they said, well, lesson tick. Now, I'd never do that, by the way. But it's frustrating. You know, you make plans, you travel, you do all the things necessary, and you arrive, and they're not only unprepared, they're not even there. Well, imagine how embarrassing it would be for the Apostle Paul to have done all these things and talked all this and spoke to these matters, and they get to Corinth and they haven't had a single weekly collection since Paul sent the first letter. And recognize, by the way, and you may wonder too, why is Paul driving all these points home? And keep in mind, we've known about 1 Corinthians 16 for how long? All our lives, right? We've been doing that forever. They hadn't been doing that until they got that letter. So they've only had a weekly collection and an understanding of that within this year that has gone between the first letter and the time that Paul writes the second letter. And so they're just learning the process of having this weekly collection. And so you could understand somewhat the concern that Paul has, that he's boasted and shown great confidence that they've been receptive to that initial message and they're getting it done. But he wants to remind them to make sure, I know this is new, but let's be sure that we're prepared, not unprepared, because that would be embarrassing, not necessarily just for you that we say it, not ye, but we, Paul said. Go ahead, Bob. I don't know, I'd use the word extort, but to motivate, I'll accept that word. To motivate them, yes. I think that he's on multiple layers, Bob. I think he wants them, number one, to understand this is the plan and purposes of God. This is how God wants it done. That's the authority side. And then he wants them to know, and we're going to talk about it here in a minute, but he wants them to know that others are getting behind this work. It's needed. There are saints that need your help, and you all have the ability to get behind this too. And so let's do that, and maybe even more so than you thought. Yeah, you find that kind of example that it hopefully will light a fire onto folks who have, and you know, and I remember a preacher I worked with for a while in my youth. Am I allowed to say that? I'm 52 now. Am I allowed to say in my youth? Is that fair? But to you all, I'm 20 forever, which is okay. But anyway, but I remember him telling me that he was an elder in a congregation, and there was a need arose as far as wanting to support another preacher, and not locally, but one abroad. And they had several men they were supporting, different things they were doing, and they didn't have the budget to do it, but they wanted to do it. So he just went before the congregation and said, if we can see an increase in the weekly contributions by X amount of dollars over a span of time, then and told them, we're going to support this, and told them the name, told them exactly where it was going to go. And he said, Brian, he said within the first month, the increase came. And what that taught me was sometimes you give people purpose, what you're trying to do, and they'll rally behind it. And that's what happens here with Paul. He's given them a purpose. There's needy saints in Judea. There's a famine. They need your help. And He's given them a purpose. They know exactly where it's going. They know what it's going to be used for. And so hopefully that's a motivation for them to dig deep, if in a sense, and fulfill this purpose that's set before them. Go ahead, Jim. Yeah, there's conversations, no doubt. So he doesn't want to be ashamed in all this boasting, so let's get it done, he says. Verse 5. Therefore I thought it necessary to exhort the brethren, that they would go before unto you and make up beforehand your bounty, whereof you had noticed before, that the same might be ready as a matter of bounty, and not as of covetousness. And so, so I've thought a little bit about this concept, that the same might be ready as a matter of bounty, not as covetousness. So what think ye? I'll give you a chance. In what way could covetousness become part of this equation if they're not careful? Okay, out of obligation maybe, and we'll see more of that before he's done talking here. That could be part of this. Okay, my mind went there. I don't know whether that's 100% accurate or not, but I thought the same thing. Is Paul's saying, listen, I'm challenging you by pointing to Macedonia, and I tell Macedonia about the Corinthians, and I tell those in Achaia about Macedonia and Corinth, and I'm boasting about this, and I'm expressing confidence in everybody, but it's not a competition. He's already said that he wants all things to be what? Equal, right? This isn't a competition. So I do this because I know you can be generous. You all in Corinth have the ability to be generous when it comes to this situation. I'm not trying to get any church to outdo the other. I don't want you to do this out of coveting to be the top giver in this process. I want you to simply give out of your generosity, at least with the same fervor that Macedonia gave out of their poverty. But it's not about who did the best, and it's not about coveting that. That's what I saw here, and those kinds of things can happen. I've read some history where there are some churches and synagogues in particularly metropolitan areas where people make sizable donations to get the best seats in the house. They pay to have the seat they want. I make a pretty good side living in this building because you all won't never move. But anyway, yeah. Jeff, that's right. They broaden their phylacteries, those hems of their garments. They want the chief seats in the synagogues. They want to be noticed. So Paul says this isn't about being noticed. This isn't about being noticed. Thoughts or questions up to that point? Yeah. So Paul's confidence and his boasting of them is based on some communication that he's had with them that we're going to do this, Paul. And so his confidence and his boasting is, Danny, absolutely based on some type of communication that's happened as it relates to that topic that he's been able to ascertain. Yeah, and that's what Danny just mentioned. This promise that they had determined to do. These are all good comments. Thank you. So not out of covetousness, to try to be competitive. Generosity out of... And then now he begins to define the disposition and attitude. So if it's not out of those negative... So what is it about Paul? What should my mindset be? What kind of motivation and thought process should I have? So he says, but this I say, verse 6, he which soweth sparingly shall reap also sparingly. So Paul says, here's how I want you to think about it. I don't want you to think about who's the best or who's done more, who's done less. Just think about this principle of basically the principle was sowing and what? Reaping. Think about it from that standpoint. He who sows sparingly also reaps sparingly. He who sows bountifully also reaps bountifully. Now, somebody said, well, what if you have a bad crop year? Well, okay. These are principles, right? But if I plant 4 acres of corn, I'm going to get more corn than if I planted a 10 by 10 spot in my backyard, right? That's the principle. If I sow bountifully, I'll reap bountifully. Paul says, when you're giving, sow bountifully, recognizing that the rewards and benefits come in greater ways when we serve in greater ways. And we can appreciate that base principle as it comes to this. So sow bountifully, and it will return bountifully, maybe in various ways. But every man according to what? Okay, so as he purposes or determines in his heart. Now, here's what's interesting. Predominantly Jew or Gentile audience here in Corinth, most likely. We're Gentile, right? Most likely a Gentile. Now, it's not to say that there aren't going to be some potentially some Jews in this mix, but predominantly Gentile. So, what would they most likely be unfamiliar with as it relates to this topic from the Old Testament? Tithing. Okay? So the Gentile tithing would not have been a familiar principle necessarily, at least from a religious standpoint, for the Gentile. Now, maybe there's some piece of history that I'm unaware of where they did it for different reasons. I could be inaccurate on that. But from Jewish perspective, they don't have that background. So they don't. So Paul doesn't say tithe. What he says is every man gives as he purposes. You've heard me say this before, and I believe it to be true. That with the Old Testament, God was extremely specific. He would give a law, and within that law, He would give some of the most minutest details of how it is that He wanted that law to be fulfilled. Here's the law, and here is the exact way I want it. And tithing was one of those things. How it was they were going to determine what they would contribute and give. Then there were other instructions as it relates to various sacrifices. But my simple point is, under that Old Testament law, some very specific details were given as to how to fulfill it. In the New Testament, much of what God does through Jesus in the New Testament is He establishes the authority or the act that He desires, and then gives man liberty to determine how it is he'll go about that. And so some things are specified, and other things are principle-based, where you have to take the principle God has given and then make application of it. Here's one of those cases. There's no predetermined number. There's no predetermined number. And you think about it, you know, a tenth from somebody who's making $1 is a much greater challenge than a tenth of somebody who's making $1 million, right? So kind of that just a single number of say, well, we're going to use a tenth, can have various responses. And I'm not saying God's law was wrong. I'm just saying that He changes it in the New Testament. He changes the mindset to say, I want you to determine the amount. I'm not going to give you an amount. I'm not going to tell you how much it is. Well, Paul, can't you give us a hint? No, I'm not giving you a hint. What I'm giving you is a principle. And And the principle is, it's what you purpose. Don't do it grudgingly or of necessity, for God loveth a cheerful giver. Yeah, that's right. And so remember, and we'll talk, that principle will come back up again here in a minute, but God's paying attention to this. And how God reciprocates your faith and commitment to these things is going to be evident. So decide. In other words, what you believe is sowing bountifully. It's kind of what Paul says. He says there's no arbitrary number. There's no a predetermined amount. He says you purpose in your heart in a manner that would fit the description of sowing bountifully. And then at that point it becomes between you and God, right? It's between you and God at that point. Go ahead, Bob. This is a choice. I want you to make a decision to lay by and store bountifully so that you'll be ready when we get there to collect this and take it to those in need. But I want it to be a choice, not just something that I forced you to do or for any other kind of motive. You determine in your heart and in your mind. And think of it from that perspective. Don't if it doesn't matter the amount. If it hurts me to put it in the plate, then don't put anything in the plate. If you're, and by hurt I don't mean that you're giving beyond. What I mean by that is I'm reluctant, right? I really don't want to do this, but I feel like I have to. Yeah. Paul says, I'm not looking for grudgingly giving. I'll tell you a story when we're not on camera someday. Just remind me, I got a story to tell you, but I'm not going to let the world know it. I'll let you know it, but I won't let the world know it. It's an interesting thing from my youth, way back. But anyway, I'll share it another time. But we don't want to give in such a way where we're basically appearing before God like, well, we don't really want to do this, but we're supposed to, and I'm being forced to. I do remember one person telling me they went to some kind of large, popular religious figures, one of these guys that travels around and has these large venues, and anyway, at one point they did an offering, and the plates were coming around, and he felt like he was like almost like paying a ticket, like he didn't know what to do when it came. He felt like that he, and anyway, he told me that I can't remember what he gave, but he put something in that plate, and the usher just stayed there. And he just kind of looked at him, and the usher looked back down at him, and the usher went, not enough, more. And I found that story to be fascinating. Now, I'm not telling you the who's because I'm taking his version of the story as being true. But that's grudging. Why would any religious establishment of any kind or person of any kind want something grudgingly offered when God says, I don't even want it? God says, I don't even want it. If it's grudgingly or of just pure necessity, I don't want it that way. For God loveth a cheerful giver. And so, give because you know the purpose. Give because you love your God and you love those it's going to help and aid. Give because because you've purposed to do so, and you want to be part of the answer to problems and difficulties that people have. And that way you can smile while you do it. And you can do it in a cheerful manner, but not with all those other dispositions. Go ahead, Bob. No, yeah, go ahead. Yeah. 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 Paul is not trying to give them some kind of idea that, boy, if you'd give, you're going to get it all back. That's not the use of the principle there, or the parable, if you will, there. His disposition is that the general rule of thumb is when you give bountifully, you don't necessarily reap the very same things in return. What you reap is bountiful, even though it may not be the exact same things. It may be different. Go ahead, or Jim. Yeah, it seems pretty evident, doesn't it? It seems pretty evident. Yeah. Yes, go ahead, Danny. And though the Old Testament law had different ways to go about accomplishing those purposes, the purpose of taking care of one another has never changed. And being generous towards one another has never changed. And those texts in Deuteronomy illustrate that God, that mindset of God has never changed. Just the manner in which that He's instructed His people to go about it. That's all that's changed as it relates to that. Go ahead, Ken. Any other thoughts before we close tonight? I remember an account years ago of watching a fella. Now my brain's going to go blank of what his, but I believe his Robert Tilton, I think he was a televangelist down in the South when I was living down there when I was a college student. And as a college student, me and my roommates affectionately called him Brother Bob. But anyway. Brother Bob was talking one day on the but he said, if you send me $1,000, then just walk down to the local car dealership and pick the car you want, march around it 7 times, and God will provide a way for you to get that car. So send him the 1,000, go march around the car. And I told my buddy, I said that if he knew anything about the Bible, he knew the only thing that would happen is the doors would fall off and the car would fall flat. But anyway. It is amazing sometimes how guys are looking for the altar themselves. Yeah, some of them are pretty brazen. Okay, Lord willing, we'll come back into this text. Well, actually, Kent's going to pick up for me next Wednesday, but we'll come back to this next week. Thank you all.